The champagne glass trembled in my hand as Victoria Ashworth's breath touched my ear. "You don't belong here," she whispered, her voice silk-wrapped around steel. Around us, the charity gala sparkled with 1,000 lights. Crystal chandeliers casting rainbows across designer gowns and tailored tuxedos. But in that moment, the world narrowed to her words, and the way they cut through me like winter wind through silk. I stood frozen in my borrowed dress, a midnight blue creation that had cost me 3 months of savings, watching her glide away with the confidence of someone who had never questioned her place in any room. The Children's Hospital Foundation Gala was supposed to be my moment. After 2 years of volunteer work, countless hours organizing events, and finally being invited to speak about the children I'd worked with, I thought I had earned my place among these pillars of society. Sarah darling Margaret Whitmore appeared at my side, her smile bright but her eyes scanning the room for more important conversations. "How lovely that you could make it tonight." Though I must say, Victoria was just mentioning. She paused, her gaze flicking to Victoria's retreating figure. "Well, no matter. You're here now." The dismissal was gentle but unmistakable. I was here now, as if my presence was temporary, conditional, a charity case at a charity event. My throat tightened as I watched Margaret drift toward a cluster of board members, their laughter floating across the ballroom like music I wasn't invited to dance to. The ballroom stretched before me like a glittering ocean of privilege. Ice sculptures shaped like swans melted slowly under warm lights, their perfect forms dissolving drop by drop. Towers of caviar glistened on silver platters, and the silent auction items displayed on easels bore price tags that exceeded most people's annual salaries. Women draped in jewels that could fund entire hospital wings moved through the crowd like beautiful predators. Their conversations a symphony of names and numbers that meant nothing to me. "Excuse me, are you Sarah Chen?" A young waiter approached, his voice barely audible above the orchestra. His hand shook slightly as he held out a small envelope, cream-colored paper, so thick it felt like fabric. "Mrs. Ashworth asked me to give you this." He disappeared into the crowd before I could respond, leaving me holding Victoria's message like a small bomb. My fingers trembled as I opened it, the paper releasing the faint scent of expensive perfume. Inside, written in Victoria's perfect script, "The speech has been moved to after dinner. We've decided to keep it brief, 5 minutes maximum. We wouldn't want to bore our guests with too much earnestness. Also, please focus on gratitude rather than need. These people prefer inspiration to guilt. 5 minutes." I had prepared a 20-minute presentation about the children I'd worked with, Ma, who asked if angels wore fancy dresses, Marcus, who drew pictures of the family he hoped to have someday, little Sophia, who whispered her dreams during the long nights when sleep wouldn't come. 5 minutes to compress 2 years of passion, hundreds of hours of bedside vigils, and the weight of small hands trusting mine into something digestible for people who wrote checks to ease their consciences. I looked around the ballroom again, seeing it through different eyes now. The orchestra played something classical and safe, while couples moved across the dance floor in perfect synchronization, their steps as rehearsed as their smiles. Waiters glided between tables like ghosts, refilling glasses that never seemed too empty, clearing plates that barely seemed touched. Everything was choreographed, controlled, designed to create an atmosphere of effortless elegance that masked the careful calculations beneath. Victoria held court near the auction display, her diamond necklace catching the light like captured stars. She was magnificent in her element, tall, graceful, with silver hair swept into a perfect chignon and a smile that had graced countless magazine covers. Board members and donors orbited around her like planets around the sun, drawn by her gravitational pull of wealth and influence. She caught my gaze across the room and raised her glass in what might have been a toast or might have been a taunt. Her smile was perfect, practiced, the kind that opened doors and closed conversations. But her eyes held something else entirely. Not malice, exactly, but a cold assessment, as if she were calculating my worth and finding the sum insufficient. I thought of the children sleeping in hospital beds just 15 miles away, their dreams interrupted by machines that beeped through the night. I thought of parents who worked double shifts to pay for treatments, who slept in uncomfortable chairs because they couldn't afford hotel rooms, who smiled for their children while their own hearts broke in silence. They didn't belong here either, according to Victoria's mathematics of worthiness. But their stories lived in my prepared speech, in the words I'd crafted to bridge the gap between their world and this one. The waiter who had delivered Victoria's note passed by again, and I caught his arm gently. "Excuse me, what's your name?" He looked surprised, glancing around nervously. "David, Miss David Rodriguez. Do you have children, David?" His face softened immediately. "2 girls, 7 and 9. Are they healthy?" "Yes, Miss, thank God. Yes." I smiled, feeling something settle in my chest. "Then you understand why I'm here tonight." He nodded, his eyes brightening with recognition. "My cousin's boy was in the cancer ward last year. The volunteers there, they were angels. Especially this one lady who came every Tuesday with art supplies." "That was me," I said quietly. His expression transformed, and for a moment, the careful distance between server and guest dissolved. "Miss Chen, you're the one who taught him to paint. He still talks about you. Says you told him his pictures were museum-worthy." "They were," I said, and meant it. David's smile was worth more than all the diamonds in the room. He squeezed my hand briefly before disappearing back into his professional invisibility, but something had shifted. I wasn't alone here, after all. The children I'd worked with, their families, the other volunteers, the doctors and nurses who chose healing over profit were all here, carried in the stories I'd planned to tell. Victoria's whispered words echoed in my mind. "You don't belong here." But as I watched her laugh with the mayor's wife, as I saw the way the crowd parted for her like she was royalty, I began to wonder if perhaps she was right. Perhaps I didn't belong in this glittering world of appearances and obligations, where suffering was sanitized and charity was performed rather than felt. But then again, perhaps that wasn't the question I should be asking. Perhaps the question was whether this place, with all its beauty and wealth and influence, belonged to the children whose lives hung in the balance. And if it did, then someone needed to speak for them. Even if that someone wore a borrowed dress and carried student loan debt like a secret shame. The orchestra finished their piece, and in the brief silence that followed, I heard something else, the faint sound of my own heartbeat, steady and strong, reminding me that I was still here, still breathing, still capable of choosing what came next. I retreated to the garden terrace, where the October air bit through my thin shawl and the city lights blurred into watercolor streaks beyond the estate's walls. The silence here was different, not the orchestrated quiet of polite society, but something raw and honest that let me breathe again. My heels clicked against the stone tiles as I walked to the railing, each step echoing in the vast space like a heartbeat. The garden below was a masterpiece of landscape architecture, even in autumn's grip. Perfectly pruned hedges created geometric patterns around a central fountain, its water catching the light from the ballroom windows. Rose bushes, dormant now but still elegant in their winter preparation, lined pathways that curved toward hidden alcoves. Everything was designed to be beautiful, controlled, tamed into submission. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, I could see the gala continuing without me. Victoria moved through the crowd like a conductor, leading an orchestra, every gesture deliberate, every smile calculated. She paused at each cluster of guests, her head tilted at just the right angle to convey interest, her laugh timed perfectly to punctuate conversations. She was magnificent in her element, and I hated that I could see it, could almost admire the artistry of her performance. Hiding out here too, I turned to find Dr. James Morrison, the hospital's chief pediatric oncologist, stepping onto the terrace with 2 cups of coffee. His bow tie was slightly askew, and there was something refreshingly rumpled about him in this sea of perfection. His hair, graying at the temples, looked like he'd run his hands through it, and his jacket bore the faint wrinkles of someone who'd been working long before he dressed for this evening. "I don't think I'm hiding," I said, accepting the warm cup gratefully. The ceramic was thick, institutional, nothing like the delicate china being used inside. Just ... regrouping. He leaned against the stone railing beside me, his gaze following mine to the party beyond the glass. Victoria Ashworth cornered you, didn't she? I saw her talking to you earlier. Recognized the look on your face afterward. The coffee was bitter. Honest, tasting of late nights and early mornings, rather than the artisanal blends being served inside. You know her well. Well enough. His voice carried years of careful diplomacy, the weight of someone who'd learned to navigate between healing and politics. She's been the Foundation's largest donor for 5 years running, writes checks that keep our doors open and our equipment current. The new MRI machine, that's Victoria's money. The playroom renovation, Victoria again, but she has opinions about who should represent the cause. A gust of wind sent leaves skittering across the terrace, their dry whispers mixing with the distant sound of laughter from inside. I pulled my shawl tighter, feeling the cold seep through the thin fabric. And I'm not the right kind of representative. You're not the right kind of anything, according to Victoria's standards. He paused, studying my face in the dim light cast by the garden's subtle illumination. Your parents were immigrants, weren't they? You worked your way through college, probably have student loans you're still paying off. You volunteer because you care, not because it looks good on your social calendar or provides tax benefits. Each word was a small wound, accurate and painful. How did you, because I was you, once. 20 years ago, fresh out of medical school, invited to my first hospital fundraiser. I wore my father's old suit, the one he'd bought for my high school graduation, and thought I was so grateful to be included. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Victoria's mother was running things then. Eleanor Ashworth, same whispered comments, same subtle exclusions. The only difference was I had a medical degree to hide behind. What changed? I learned the game. Married well, my wife, comes from old money, the kind that doesn't need to announce itself. Invested wisely, started writing my own checks instead of just cashing theirs. Built a reputation that made me untouchable. He turned to face me fully, his expression serious. But you know what I never learned? How to sleep at night, knowing I'd let them silence the voices that mattered most. Inside, I could see Victoria at the podium now, her voice carrying through the glass as she introduced the evening's program. She spoke of hope and healing, of the Foundation's mission to provide world-class care to children regardless of their family's ability to pay. Her words painted pictures that would open wallets and ease consciences, each phrase carefully crafted to inspire generosity without demanding too much emotional investment. She's not wrong, you know, I said quietly, surprising myself with the admission. Dr. Morrison raised an eyebrow. About what? I don't belong here. Look at this place. I gestured toward the ballroom, where women in gowns worth more than my annual salary chatted casually about vacation homes and art acquisitions. These people live in a different universe. They write checks for amounts that could change my life without even checking their bank balances. What could I possibly say to them that would matter? You could tell them about Emma. The name hit me like a physical blow. Emma Rodriguez David, the waiter's cousin's child, though I hadn't made that connection until tonight. 7 years old, with acute lymphoblastic leukemia and a smile that could light up the darkest hospital corridor. She'd been in treatment for 8 months when I first met her, her small body dwarfed by the hospital bed, but her spirit undiminished. She asked me once if the angels in heaven wore fancy dresses like the ladies in the magazines her mother brought her. I continued, the memory flowing out of me like water from a broken dam. I told her I thought they probably wore whatever made them happy. She said she hoped they wore jeans and sneakers because fancy dresses looked uncomfortable. Dr. Morrison smiled, a real smile this time. What else did she say? That when she got better, she wanted to be a doctor, like you. But not the kind who wore suits, to work the kind who wore scrubs with cartoon characters because they made kids laugh. My voice caught slightly. She drew me a picture of herself in a white coat covered in butterflies, said she'd keep it in her pocket to remind her that beautiful things could still exist in sad places. The wind picked up again, sending my hair across my face. I brushed it back, tasting salt and realizing I was crying. She died 3 weeks ago. The funeral was yesterday. Her mother asked me to speak, and I couldn't. I just, couldn't find the words. But you found them for tonight. I tried to 20 minutes of stories like Emma's abo children who see magic in the middle of medical nightmares, about families who find strength they never knew they had, about why this work matters beyond the tax deductions and the photo opportunities. I laughed bitterly. Victoria cut it to 5 minutes. Said the guests prefer inspiration to guilt. Dr. Morrison was quiet for a long moment, his gaze fixed on the fountain below. When he spoke, his voice was soft but firm. Emma's mother, Maria Rodriguez, she cleans offices downtown, works 3 jobs to support her family. Do you know what she told me at the funeral? I shook my head. She said Emma talked about you every day, called you her angel in jeans, said you were the only person who never looked at her like she was dying, only like she was living. He turned to face me again. Maria Rodriguez will never set foot in that ballroom. She'll never write a check with multiple zeros or have her name engraved on a plaque. But she knows something these people don't. What's that? She knows what grace looks like. And so do you. Through the windows, I could see the dinner service beginning. Waiters moved between tables with military precision, serving courses that cost more than most families spent on groceries in a month. The guests barely looked up from their conversations, their attention focused on networking and social positioning rather than the artistry of the meal before them. Victoria's not evil, Dr. Morrison continued. She's just insulated. Born into wealth, married into more wealth, surrounded by people who measure worth in dollars and social connections. She genuinely believes she's helping, and in many ways, she is. But she's never sat beside a hospital bed at 3 a.m, never held a parent's hand while they signed papers they couldn't afford, never watched a child fight for their life with nothing but hope and stubbornness. So what do? Give the sanitized version of my speech. Talk about gratitude and inspiration while leaving out the parts that might make people uncomfortable. You could. He finished his coffee and set the cup on the railing. Or you could remember that Emma drew butterflies on her doctor's coat because she believed beautiful things belonged in sad places. Maybe that's what these people need to hear, not that their money is appreciated, but that their money has the power to create beauty in the darkest corners of the world. A door opened behind us, and David the waiter appeared, looking apologetic. Excuse me, Dr. Morrison, they're ready for you inside. Thank you, David. Dr. Morrison straightened his bow tie and turned back to me. I'm introducing you tonight. What should I tell them about who you are? I thought about Emma's butterflies, about Maria Rodriguez's 3 jobs and unwavering love, about all the children sleeping in hospital beds while their parents kept vigil in uncomfortable chairs. I thought about Victoria's whispered words and her perfectly calculated smile, about the weight of borrowed dresses and the price of belonging. Tell them I'm someone who believes that every child deserves to dream in color, I said finally. Even when the world looks gray. Dr. Morrison smiled and headed back inside, leaving me alone with the October wind and the distant sound of polite applause. In the ballroom, Victoria had finished her introduction and was scanning the crowd, probably looking for me. Her expression was serene, confident, as if she'd already won a game I didn't know we were playing. But as I stood there in the cold, clutching my coffee cup and feeling Emma's memory settle around me like armor, I realized something important. Victoria was right. I didn't belong in her world of careful appearances and calculated charity. But Emma had belonged in mine, and Maria Rodriguez belonged in mine, and every child fighting for their life in a hospital bed belonged in mine. The question wasn't whether I belonged here. The question was whether I could bring my world to theirs, even for 5 minutes, even in a borrowed dress, even with my voice shaking and my hands trembling. The answer, I realized, was yes. I returned to the ballroom as the main course was being served, some delicate arrangement of duck and microgreens that looked more like art than food. My assigned seat was at table 12, far from the head table where Victoria presided over the evening's most important donors. The placement was deliberate, another small reminder of my status in this carefully orchestrated hierarchy. My tablemates were a mix of mid-level donors and their spouses, pleasant people who made polite conversation about the weather and their children's college plans. Mrs. Patterson, whose husband owned a chain of dental practices, asked about my work at the hospital with genuine interest. Mr. Chun, no relation despite sharing my surname, told me about his daughter's volunteer work at an animal shelter, his pride evident in every word. It's wonderful that young people still care about giving back, Mrs. Patterson said, cutting her duck into precise, small pieces. Though I must say, the hospital is lucky to have someone like Victoria Ashworth championing their cause. Such dedication, such ... presence, she certainly commands attention, I agreed carefully. Oh, it's more than that, Mr. Chen interjected. My wife serves on the board of the art museum with her. Victoria's involvement transforms organizations. Fundraising increases, community awareness grows, media coverage improves. She has a gift for making people care about causes they might otherwise overlook. I nodded, watching Victoria across the room as she leaned in to hear something the mayor was saying. Her laugh was perfectly timed, her expression engaged but not overeager. She was performing, but it was a masterful performance, one that served a purpose beyond her own ego. Has she always been involved with the children's hospital? I asked. Mrs. Patterson and Mr. Chen exchanged a glance that lasted just a moment too long. Well, Mrs. Patterson said slowly, she became much more active about 5 years ago. Before that, her focus was primarily on the arts, symphony, ballet, museum exhibitions. What changed? Another glance between my tablemates. Mr. Chen cleared his throat. I believe there was a personal connection that developed. Sometimes that's what it takes to truly understand a cause. Before I could ask more, the lights dimmed slightly and Dr. Morrison approached the podium. The conversations around the room gradually quieted as he adjusted the microphone and smiled out at the assembled guests. Good evening, everyone. I hope you're enjoying this wonderful meal and the company of fellow supporters of our mission. His voice carried easily across the ballroom, warm and professional. Before we move to our evening's program, I want to share something with you. This morning, I received a letter from a young patient, from her mother, actually. The child is only 6 years old. He pulled a folded piece of paper from his jacket pocket, and I could see even from my distant table that it was written on lined notebook paper in careful handwriting. Maria Rodriguez wrote to thank our volunteers for the care her daughter Emma received during her treatment. She wanted us to know that Emma passed away peacefully last week, surrounded by love and hope rather than fear. Dr. Morrison's voice remained steady, but I could see his hands tighten slightly on the podium. Maria wrote that Emma's final weeks were filled with art projects, story time, and dreams of becoming a doctor herself someday. She said the volunteers taught Emma that hospitals could be places of joy and creativity, not just sadness and fear. The ballroom was completely silent now. Even the waiters had stopped moving, standing respectfully along the walls as Dr. Morrison continued. Emma drew pictures for everyone who cared for her. Butterflies, rainbows, families holding hands under sunny skies. She gave them away freely, these small masterpieces, because she said beautiful things should be shared. He paused, his gaze finding mine across the room. Tonight, one of those volunteers is here with us. Someone who sat beside Emma's bed, who brought art supplies and encouragement, who helped a dying child see beauty in the world around her. I felt the attention of the room shifting toward me. A subtle turning of heads and bodies as people tried to identify the volunteer Dr. Morrison was describing. My heart began to race, but I kept my eyes fixed on his face, drawing strength from his steady presence. Sarah Chen has prepared remarks for us tonight about the children she's worked with and the families she's supported. But before she speaks, I want to share one more thing from Maria Rodriguez's letter. He unfolded the paper again, his voice growing softer. She wrote, Emma told me that Miss Sarah was different from the fancy ladies who sometimes visited the hospital. She said Miss Sarah looked at her like she was the most important person in the world, not like she was sick or poor or different. Emma said Miss Sarah had magic hands that could turn sadness into butterflies. Dr. Morrison folded the letter carefully and returned it to his pocket. "Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Sarah Chen." The applause was polite but warm as I stood and made my way to the podium. My legs felt unsteady, and I was acutely aware of every eye in the room following my progress. Victoria's expression was unreadable from this distance, but I could feel her attention like a weight on my shoulders. As I reached the podium, Dr. Morrison squeezed my hand briefly. 5 minutes or 50, he whispered. Tell Emma's story. I looked out at the sea of faces, some curious, some politely attentive, some already checking their phones or watches. These were people accustomed to being entertained, inspired, and then released to write their checks and return to their comfortable lives. They expected a certain kind of speech, grateful, uplifting, carefully sanitized of anything too raw or challenging. "Thank you, Dr. Morrison, and thank you all for being here tonight," I began, my voice steadier than I'd expected. 5 years ago, I walked into the children's cancer ward for the first time as a volunteer. I thought I was there to help others, to give back to my community, to make a difference in small ways. I paused, scanning the room until I found Victoria's table. She was watching me intently, her expression neutral but alert. I was wrong. I wasn't there to give anything. I was there to receive the greatest education of my life. I took a breath, feeling Emma's memory settle around me like courage. The children taught me that hope isn't about believing everything will be okay. Hope is about finding reasons to smile, even when everything is falling apart. A few people nodded, their expressions softening slightly. This was the kind of inspiration they'd come to hear. Emma Rodriguez taught me that lesson better than anyone. She was 7 years old, fighting leukemia, and she spent her time in the hospital making art for everyone around her. Not because she was naive about her situation, but because she understood something the rest of us often forget. I reached into my small purse and pulled out a folded piece of paper, one of Emma's drawings that her mother had given me after the funeral. I unfolded it carefully, revealing a crayon drawing of a butterfly with rainbow wings. Emma drew this for me 2 weeks before she died. She said butterflies were proof that beautiful things could come from dark places, that transformation was always possible, even when it looked impossible. My voice caught slightly, but I continued. She made me promise to show it to the fancy ladies at the hospital fundraiser. She said they needed to remember that their money wasn't just buying equipment or funding research, was buying hope. The room was completely silent now, the kind of silence that felt alive and attentive rather than polite and waiting. But Emma taught me something else. Something I didn't understand until tonight. I looked directly at Victoria, who had gone very still in her chair. She taught me that belonging isn't about wearing the right clothes or knowing the right people or having the right background. Belonging is about showing up with your whole heart, especially when it's breaking. I could see Victoria's face clearly now, and something had shifted in her expression. The careful composure was still there, but underneath it, I glimpsed something raw and unguarded. Earlier tonight, someone told me I don't belong here, and they were right, in a way. I don't belong to this world of galas and designer gowns and carefully orchestrated charity. But Emma belonged to my world, and Maria Rodriguez belongs to my world. And every child fighting for their life in a hospital bed belongs to my world. I held up Emma's drawing again, the rainbow butterfly catching the light from the chandeliers. The question isn't whether I belong here. The question is whether you're willing to belong to their world, even for a moment. Whether you're willing to see past the tax deductions and the photo opportunities to the real magic happening in those hospital rooms, the magic of children who draw butterflies while their bodies fail them, of parents who find strength they never knew they had, of volunteers who discover that healing flows both ways. The silence stretched on, and I could feel the weight of expectation settling over the room. This was the moment when I was supposed to ask for money to make the pitch that would justify my presence here. Instead, I folded Emma's drawing and returned it to my purse. "I don't want your money tonight," I said quietly. "I want something more valuable. I want you to remember Emma Rodriguez. I want you to remember that she drew butterflies because she believed beautiful things belonged in sad places. And I want you to ask yourselves, what butterflies are you drawing? What beauty are you creating in the dark corners of the world?" I stepped back from the podium, my heart racing, unsure if I'd just made the speech of my life or committed social suicide. The silence continued for what felt like an eternity, and then someone began to clap. Not the polite, measured applause of obligation, but something real and sustained. Others joined in, and soon the entire room was applauding, some people rising to their feet. I saw tears on faces that had been carefully composed moments before, saw hands reaching for tissues and spouses reaching for each other. But my attention was fixed on Victoria Ashworth, who sat perfectly still at her table. Her hands folded in her lap, her face a mask of control that couldn't quite hide the storm beneath. As the applause finally died down and I made my way back to my table, I realized that something fundamental had shifted in the room. The careful distance between charity and need, between giver and receiver, had collapsed. For a moment, we had all belonged to the same world-moss world, where butterflies could bloom in the darkest places. But I also realized that my speech had done more than inspire. It had revealed something, exposed a truth that someone in this room had been working very hard to keep hidden. And as Victoria Ashworth rose from her table and walked purposefully toward the exit, her composure finally cracking, I understood that the evening was far from over. I found Victoria in the estate's library, a room lined floor to ceiling with leather-bound volumes that looked more decorative than read. She stood with her back to the door, facing a wall of first editions, her shoulders rigid with the kind of control that comes from years of practice. The party continued without us, the sound of conversation and clinking glasses, a distant murmur through the heavy wooden doors. "You shouldn't have come here," she said without turning around. Her voice was steady, but I could hear the hairline cracks in her composure. "You left rather suddenly. I wanted to make sure you were all right." She laughed, a sound like breaking crystal. "All right, do you have any idea what you've done in there?" I told the truth about Emma Rodriguez, about the children we're supposed to be helping. "You told a story." Victoria turned to face me, and I saw that her perfect makeup couldn't quite hide the redness around her eyes. A beautiful, heartbreaking story that will have those people writing checks with tears in their eyes. "Congratulations. You've just raised more money in 10 minutes than most speakers manage in an hour. That wasn't the point, wasn't it?" She moved closer, her heels clicking against the hardwood floor. "Wasn't the point to make them feel something real, something that would open their wallets and their hearts? To transform their polite charity into genuine passion?" I studied her face, seeing something I hadn't noticed before, deep exhaustion that went beyond the fatigue of hosting an elaborate event. "Why does that upset you? Isn't that what we want?" Victoria walked to the library's window, which looked out over the garden where I'd stood with Dr. Morrison earlier. The fountain was illuminated now, its water dancing in the colored lights like liquid jewels. "Do you know why I became involved with the children's hospital, Sarah?" Mr. Chen mentioned there was a personal connection. Personal. She repeated the word like it tasted bitter. "Yes, I suppose that's one way to put it." She was quiet for a long moment, her reflection ghost-like in the dark window. "I had a daughter once, Lily. She would have been 12 this year." The words hit me like a physical blow. I sank into one of the leather chairs, my legs suddenly unable to support me. "Victoria, I acute lymphoblastic leukemia. The same disease that took your Emma." Victoria's voice was clinical now, as if she were reading from a medical chart. "Diagnosed at age 6, fought for 18 months. Died 3 weeks before her 8th birthday." The room seemed to shrink around us, the weight of her revelation pressing down like a physical presence. "I'm so sorry. I had no idea." "Of course you didn't. I made sure of that." Victoria turned from the window, her composure reassembling itself piece by piece. Do you know what it's like to lose a child, Sarah? To watch them fight with everything they have? To see them smile through pain that would break grown men? To hold their hand while they slip away despite all the money and connections and influence in the world? I shook my head, unable to speak. It changes you. Fundamentally, irreversibly. The person I was before Lily died, she doesn't exist anymore. What's left is someone who learned that grief is a luxury the living can't afford if they want to save other children. Victoria moved to the desk and opened a drawer, pulling out a silver frame that she handed to me. The photograph showed a little girl with Victoria's elegant features and bright, mischievous eyes. She was wearing a hospital gown decorated with cartoon characters, but her smile was radiant, undiminished by her circumstances. She drew pictures too, Victoria said softly. Hundreds of them. Flowers and rainbows and families having picnics. She gave them to everyone: doctors, nurses, other patients, visitors. She said art was medicine for sad hearts. I looked up from the photograph, understanding beginning to dawn. The playroom renovation, the art therapy program, all in Lily's memory. Anonymous donations, of course. I couldn't bear to have her name on plaques and dedication ceremonies. It felt too much like putting her on display, using her death for publicity. But you've raised millions for the hospital. You've saved countless children. Have I? Victoria's laugh was hollow. Or have I simply learned to weaponize grief? To turn my daughter's death into a tool for extracting money from people who want to feel good about themselves? She took the photograph back, holding it like something precious and fragile. When I saw you tonight, when I heard you were going to speak about the children you've worked with, I panicked. Because I knew you would do what I've never been able to do. You would make it real for them. You would strip away the comfortable distance between their charity and the actual suffering it's meant to address. Why is that a bad thing? Because once they really see it, they'll want more. More stories, more access, more emotional connection to the cause. They'll want to visit the hospital, meet the families, be part of the narrative in ways that go beyond writing checks. Victoria's voice grew strained. And I can't be around that. I can't watch other people's children fight the same battle. Lily lost. I can't smile and nod while parents tell me about their hope and their faith and their belief that love will be enough to save their babies. The truth settled between us like a living thing, raw and painful and impossible to ignore. Victoria Ashworth, the Foundation's most powerful advocate, couldn't actually bear to be around the children she was helping to save. So you keep your distance, I said quietly. You raise money from a safe remove, never getting close enough to see the faces or hear the stories. It works, Victoria said defensively. The hospital has more funding than ever before. Equipment, research, programs, all because I learned how to play this game effectively. But it's not sustainable, is it? Eventually, people want to see results. They want to connect with the mission on a deeper level. Victoria was quiet for a long moment, her gaze fixed on Lily's photograph. Dr. Morrison has been pushing for more volunteer involvement, more family engagement with donors. He thinks it will increase long-term commitment to the cause. He's probably right. And that terrifies you. Yes. The admission came out as barely a whisper. Because I know that once I let myself care about another child the way I cared about Lily, I'll lose the ability to function. The grief will swallow me whole, and I'll be useless to everyone. I thought about Emma's butterfly drawing, still folded in my purse. About Maria Rodriguez's letter, and Dr. Morrison's steady presence, and David the waiter's pride in his cousin's recovery. About all the ways that love and loss intertwined in the work of healing. What if you're wrong? I asked gently. What if caring more doesn't make you weaker, but stronger? Victoria's composure finally cracked completely. Tears spilled down her cheeks, carrying her carefully applied makeup with them. I can't risk it, Sarah. I can't risk loving another child and losing them. I can't survive that again. But you're not surviving now, I said, standing and moving closer to her. You're existing, you're functioning, but you're not living. Living is overrated when you've buried your child. Is that what Lily would want for you? A life spent in careful isolation, helping others from a distance, but never allowing yourself to feel the joy of connection. Victoria's shoulders shook with silent sobs. Don't use my daughter to manipulate me. I'm not manipulating you. I'm telling you what Emma taught me, that love doesn't end when someone dies. It transforms. It becomes something that can heal others, but only if we're brave enough to let it. Through the library windows, I could see guests beginning to move toward the ballroom's exit. The evening was winding down, but I sensed that something important was just beginning. "Your speech tonight," Victoria said, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. "It was exactly what I was afraid of. You made them see the children as real people, not just causes to support. You broke down the walls I've spent 5 years building." "Good," I said firmly. "Those walls weren't protecting anyone. They were just keeping you trapped." Victoria looked at me with something that might have been admiration or might have been fear. "You really don't understand what you've done, do you? Those people in there, they're going to want more now. More access, more involvement, more emotional investment. The foundation will change. And I'll have to change with it, or step aside. Maybe stepping aside isn't the worst thing that could happen. It is if it means the funding disappears. It is if it means other children die, because I couldn't keep my personal trauma separate from my professional obligations." I thought about this, about the weight of responsibility she'd been carrying alone for 5 years. What if you didn't have to carry it alone anymore? "What do you mean?" "What if there were other people who understood? Other parents who've lost children, other volunteers who've learned to transform grief into service? What if instead of hiding from the pain, you found a way to share it?" Victoria stared at me for a long moment, her expression cycling through disbelief, hope, and terror. "You're suggesting I become vulnerable? Publicly vulnerable? I'm suggesting you become human. Publicly human." She laughed. But it was a different sound, now still broken, but with the possibility of healing in it. "Do you have any idea how terrifying that is for someone like me?" "Probably about as terrifying as giving a speech to a room full of people who think you don't belong there." Victoria smiled then, a real smile that transformed her entire face. "Touché," she looked down at Lily's photograph again, her expression softening. "She would have liked you, I think." Lily was drawn to people who weren't afraid to feel things deeply. I would have liked her too. She drew a butterfly once, near the end, purple and gold, with wings that looked like stained glass. She said it was flying toward the light. Victoria's voice was steady now, but full of emotion. I had it framed, but I've never been able to look at it without falling apart. "Maybe it's time to fall apart," I said gently. "Maybe that's the first step toward putting yourself back together." Through the library doors, we could hear the sounds of the party winding down, guests saying their goodbyes. Cars being brought around, the careful choreography of a successful social event reaching its conclusion. But in this quiet room, surrounded by books and memories and the weight of shared understanding, something new was beginning. Victoria Ashworth, the Foundation's most powerful and most distant advocate, was finally ready to come home to the cause she'd been serving from afar. And I realized that my 5-minute speech had accomplished something. I'd never intended it had created space for someone else's truth to emerge. The evening wasn't ending. It was transforming, like a butterfly emerging from its chrysalis, ready to spread wings that had been folded in darkness for far too long. 6 months later, I stood in the Children's Hospital playroom, watching Victoria Ashworth read a story to a group of young patients. She sat cross-legged on the floor, her designer suit replaced by jeans and a sweater. Her perfect composure softened into something more genuine and infinitely more beautiful. In her lap was a book about butterflies, one of dozens she'd donated to the hospital's library in Lily's memory. And so the caterpillar learned that sometimes the scariest changes lead to the most beautiful transformations, she read, her voice gentle but clear. Around her, children in various stages of treatment listened with the kind of attention that only comes from understanding that stories can be medicine. 8-year-old Marcus, the same Marcus I'd worked with 2 years ago, now in remission and thriving, raised his hand. Mrs. Victoria, do you think people can transform like butterflies too? Victoria's eyes met mine across the room, and I saw in them the peace that comes from finding your way home after a long journey. I know they can, Marcus. Sometimes it just takes longer than we expect, and sometimes we need help from friends to spread our wings. The reading session ended, and the children dispersed to other activities: art, therapy, music class, visits with family members. Victoria approached me, carrying the butterfly book and wearing an expression of contentment I'd never seen on her face before. How did it go? I asked, though I could see the answer in her relaxed posture and genuine smile. Terrifying and wonderful, she admitted. Just like you said it would be. She looked around the playroom, taking in the colorful murals, the comfortable seating areas, the shelves full of art supplies and books. Lily would have loved this place. She helped create it, I reminded her. Every donation you made in her memory, every program you funded it, all led to this. Victoria nodded, but her expression grew thoughtful. I've been thinking about what you said that night in the library, about love transforming rather than ending when someone dies. I think I'm finally beginning to understand what you meant. Through the playroom's large windows, we could see the hospital's garden, where spring was asserting itself in bursts of color and new growth. Families sat on benches, some celebrating good news, others simply finding moments of peace in the midst of uncertainty. It was a place where hope and heartbreak coexisted, where beauty bloomed alongside sorrow. The foundation board meeting is next week, Victoria said, settling into one of the comfortable chairs that had been purchased with funds she'd raised. Dr. Morrison wants to propose a new initiative, a support group for parents who've lost children to cancer. He thinks it could help other families while also creating a network of advocates who understand the cause on a deeply personal level. What do you think? I think it's exactly what Lily would want me to do. Victoria's voice was steady, but I could see the emotion in her eyes. I think she'd want her death to mean something beyond just funding medical equipment. She'd want it to help other parents find their way through the darkness. I thought about that night 6 months ago, about the whispered words that had started everything, and the speech that had changed both our lives. Are you going to tell them about Lily? Yes. The word came out firm and clear, without hesitation. It's time. Past time, really. Victoria smiled, and I saw in that expression the woman she might have been if grief hadn't taught her to hide her heart. I'm going to tell them about a little girl who drew butterflies because she believed beautiful things belonged in sad places, and I'm going to ask them to help me make sure her belief becomes reality for other children. A soft knock on the playroom door interrupted our conversation. David Rodriguez, the waiter from the gala, though I now knew him simply as Emma's cousin, peered in with a shy smile. He'd become a regular volunteer since that night, bringing his daughters to help with art projects and story time. Miss Sarah, Mrs. Victoria, he said, his voice warm with familiarity. I wanted to let you know that Maria is here. She brought something for you both. Maria Rodriguez entered the playroom carrying a small, wrapped package, her face bright with the kind of joy that comes from finding purpose in pain. She'd joined our volunteer team 3 months ago, channeling her grief into service for other families facing similar battles. I finished it, she said simply, handing the package to Victoria. I hope it's what you wanted. Victoria unwrapped the gift carefully, revealing a small framed drawing of Miss Butterfly, the one I'd shown at the gala, but now professionally matted and preserved behind museum-quality glass. Below the drawing, in elegant script, were the words, "In memory of Emma Rodriguez and Lily Ashworth Butterflies, who taught us that beautiful things belong in sad places." Victoria's breath caught, and for a moment I thought she might break down. Instead, she stood and embraced Maria, to mothers united by loss and transformed by love. It's perfect, Victoria whispered. Thank you. Emma would be so happy, Maria said, tears streaming down her face. She always said her pictures were meant to be shared. Now she and your Lily can help other children together. As we stood there in the playroom, surrounded by the evidence of hope and healing, I realized that the story that had begun with a whispered cruelty had transformed into something none of us could have imagined. Victoria's wealth and influence, once used to maintain careful distance from pain, now served to bridge the gap between loss and love. Maria's grief had become a source of comfort for other parents. My borrowed dress and uncertain voice had found their purpose in speaking truth to power. "There's something else," Victoria said, turning to me with an expression that was part nervous, part excited. The board approved funding for a new position, director of family services. Someone to coordinate volunteer programs, support groups, and community outreach. Someone who understands both the medical side and the human side of what we do here. I stared at her, understanding dawning slowly. "Victoria, the salary is competitive, the benefits are excellent, and you'd have complete autonomy to develop programs that actually serve families rather than just looking good in annual reports." Her smile was mischievous now, reminiscent of the little girl in the photograph she'd shown me that night. "Also, the dress code is strictly casual, jeans and sneakers strongly encouraged." I thought about Emma's words, about angels wearing whatever made them happy, about butterflies emerging from dark places and the courage it took to spread new wings, about belonging not to a world of privilege and appearances, but to a community of people who chose love over fear, service over comfort, truth over convenience. "When do I start?" I asked. The celebration that followed was quiet, but profound. Maria's laughter mixing with Victoria's tears. David's proud smile as he called his wife to share the news, the sound of children playing in the background like a symphony of hope. Through the windows, the spring garden bloomed in defiant beauty, proof that life persists and transforms even in the shadow of loss. As the afternoon wore on and visiting hours came to an end, Victoria and I found ourselves alone in the playroom once more. She sat in the chair where she'd been reading earlier, Emma and Lily's butterfly drawing cradled in her hands like something precious and sacred. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you hadn't given that speech?" she asked. "If you'd stuck to the 5-minute version, said what I wanted you to say." I considered this, thinking about the chain of events that had led us here. I think we would have raised some money that night and gone back to our separate lives. You would have continued funding the hospital from a distance, and I would have continued volunteering on weekends. The children would still have been helped, but we wouldn't have been healed. Victoria finished. We wouldn't have learned that grief shared is grief transformed. Emma used to say that butterflies were proof that endings could be beginnings, I said. I think she was right. Victoria stood and walked to the window, where the last light of day was painting the garden in shades of gold and amber. "I'm going to visit her grave tomorrow. Lily's, I haven't been since the funeral, but I think it's time. I want to tell her about the playroom, about the families we're helping, about the butterflies we're creating in her memory. Would you like company?" She turned back to me, her expression soft with gratitude. "I would like that very much." As we prepared to leave the hospital, I thought about that night 6 months ago when Victoria had whispered that I didn't belong. She'd been right, in a way I hadn't belonged to her world of careful charity and calculated compassion. But in the end, she'd chosen to belong to mine. To a world where love was messy, and healing was hard work, and butterflies could emerge from the darkest places. The evening air was warm, with the promise of summer as we walked through the hospital's front doors. Behind us, the building hummed with the quiet activity of healing nurses making rounds. Families keeping vigil, children dreaming of tomorrow despite the uncertainty of today. Ahead of us lay the work of transformation, the daily choice to turn grief into grace, loss into love, whispered cruelties into spoken truths. Victoria paused at her car, looking back at the hospital with an expression of wonder, as if seeing it clearly for the first time. "You know what the strangest part is?" she said. "I spent 5 years trying to help these children while protecting myself from caring too much. But it turns out that caring too much is exactly what they needed from me, and what you needed for yourself," I added. She smiled, the kind of smile that starts small and grows until it transforms everything around it. "Emma and Lily would be proud, don't you think?" Two little girls who drew butterflies and changed the world. As I drove home that night, I thought about the speech I'd given 6 months ago, about the words that had tumbled out of me in defiance of expectations and limitations. I'd told that roomful of strangers that I didn't want their money. I wanted them to remember Emma Rodriguez and ask themselves what butterflies they were drawing in the dark corners of the world. Now I knew the answer. We were all drawing butterflies, each in our own way. Victoria with her transformed advocacy, Maria with her channeled grief, David with his quiet service, Dr. Morrison with his patient bridge building between worlds. Even the children themselves, fighting battles that would break most adults while still finding reasons to smile, to create, to hope. The whisper that had started it all, "You don't belong here," had become the catalyst for a different kind of belonging. Not the belonging of privilege or position, but the belonging that comes from choosing to show up with your whole heart, especially when it's breaking. The belonging that transforms charity into love, distance into connection, endings into beginnings. In my purse, I still carried Emma's butterfly drawing, now joined by a photograph of Lily that Victoria had given me. Two little girls who had never met, but whose spirits had conspired to heal the adults they'd left behind. To butterflies who had taught us that beautiful things don't just belong in sad places. They can transform those places into something entirely new. And in the end, we all learned to fly.